everyone. Thank you for joining us here at our gorgeous VFW. Here in Beacon on Main Street for our Dutchess County Comptroller, Aymar-Blair's first initial kickoff of Town Hall Series. This is such an incredible thing that you're doing. Dan, thank you for doing it. I am Yvette Van Smith, and I'm one of your county legislators here in Beacon. I represent Ward 4, and I've been able, thank you, I love it here, obviously. I have represented that area with Dan for 2 terms. So not only can I speak to his absolute commitment to our community, but I can speak to his absolute high dedication and ethics in everything that he does. He's a dad to 2 small kids. Actually, I have 2 small boys too. Our kids are in, we don't share kids. But our kids, separately, are both in the Beacon City District school system here. We believe in public education, and all that is, where we're standing right now is a kind of a public-private entity. The city helps run this building that we're in, so we can use it for wonderful public meetings as well. And Dan, as a council person, helped make that happen. Dan, as our comptroller, has already attended our Dutchess County legislative meetings. He came and he gave a great report to us on federal funding. And as your county legislator, I have actually worked with, this will be my 3rd Dutchess County Comptroller. And the Comptroller's office is kind of misunderstood sometimes. But what they should be doing is acting like a watchdog and providing information. And some comptrollers have done that, and some have not. But it's a nonpartisan position. So no matter your party or affiliation, you should be able to pick up the phone and call the comptroller's office and get the information that you need about county funds. Dan has been able to do that on day 1. He knows what he's doing, and he is providing information. Dare I say it, I've even heard it from my colleagues on the other side of the aisle. He knows what he's doing, he is strong, and he is very nonpartisan, I gotta say. Sometimes to, maybe the detriment of me. But he is incredible at what he's doing, and us in the legislature really need that type of support. We need information. He is providing, him in his office, they're providing that information for us so that we, as public servants, can take care of our taxpayer dollars. We should only be here to serve. So his office specifically, very much so, shouldn't be partisan. So I hate it. I know that it's going to be attacks and things like that, so we won't talk about it. But what you're doing, Dan, Aymar-Blair, so far for our Dutchess County residents is really important, and you're taking it seriously, and I thank you very, very much. We haven't had that at every moment in that office. And it's something we desperately need. So I'm very, very proud to be able to introduce you. I've been proud to be able to work with you. And I only look forward to continuing to support our comptroller and see what other reports and audits he's coming out with. He's making this interesting, which is gonna be hard to do. But when you care so much about what's going on with your taxpayer dollars, it's a struggle more and more for all of us to pay our bills. So we need to know that our taxpayer dollars, we have a real watchdog out there. And I'm confident that we do, and I'm so, so happy to be able to also introduce Dan Aymar-Blair, who can actually also answer questions for us. Thank you for being here.
That was very gracious, thank you. Yvette and I both have a kid, however, named Leo. When we had Leo, our firstborn, my wife and I, when we first took him out of the house after 2 weeks, it was wintertime, we went out 2 weeks in, and we were like, we named our child such an original name, Leo. Nobody has kids named Leo. And the first baby knew reborn in a carriage that we ran into. Another family had a kid named Leo. So, anyway, thank you. That was very kind of you, and thanks everybody for being here. I think what Yvette started to strike on was, when I was campaigning last year for this office, and starting with my mother, when I told her that I was running for comptroller, she said, "Oh, honey, I'm so happy for you. That's great. What does that do? What is a comptroller?" And I got that a lot last year. I found that, running for office last year, I had to spend a lot of time actually just kind of explaining what the office does. And I think a lot of that has to do with the fact that there's a lot of misunderstanding about what the comptroller's office does. So it almost feels like the narrative around a comptroller's office is that, they're going to audit you, they're going to get you, it's like a gotcha game, that, the audit is coming, that if, you're in the different party, or if that you have a different opinion, that audits are weaponized and used to take down policy proposals, and that's just not the case. Because people have misconceptions about what the comptroller's office does, and because I get so many questions, I thought that would be really important once in office and once I got settled in, though I can't say I'm entirely settled in, but starting to settle in, I felt that it was important to get out and kind of explain what the office does, how we do it, who we are, and just kind of demystify the office itself. Talk a little bit about some of the reports that we've done this year, and there's samples over on the table if you want to check it out. And briefly talk about the budget, but I want to use most of the time for Q&A because this is a town hall, not a Dan presenting for an hour and a half event. So, but I just want to make a shout out for Jasmine Vasquez, who's here on behalf of the State Comptroller's Office. Thank you, Jasmine. Please stop by the table and talk to Jasmine a little bit. She has a lot of great information about what State Comptroller Tom DiNapoli does, but she can also hook you up with money, maybe. She can help you search unclaimed funds. And everybody says, "Oh, I don't have any unclaimed funds," but I can guarantee a lot of people have them. And when I was at the New York State Association of Counties a couple months ago, Tom DiNapoli was there handing out checks to counties that didn't know that they had unclaimed funds. So anyway, let's get started. What is a comptroller? The comptroller, according to our charter, is the chief accounting officer of Dutchess County. Our charter was established in 1968, creating the county executive and other offices, including the comptroller. The comptroller's office in Dutchess County, there are only 8 of the 65 counties in New York State, only 8 of those counties have elected comptrollers. As Brian, our deputy comptroller, calls us the Great Eight. The comptroller in Dutchess County, this office, is entirely independent of the county executive and the executive branch. The idea is that the county executive reports directly to the people, right? Like I have to be elected, and I have to, I'm not beholden to an administrator. I don't have a boss. My boss is the people. Which means that when I am looking through the books, my team is going through our policies and procedures and working on an audit, they are unobstructed. Like they are doing what is right, not what is necessary. They're not doing what they're told to do. They're doing what is appropriate for the people. And they're directly accountable. I'm directly accountable to the people. I am the 8th comptroller in Dutchess County, which I thought was a shockingly low number, but I guess 1968, that makes sense. And then I wanted to address one of the most common questions that I got last year, which is how do you pronounce comptroller? Comptroller can be pronounced comptroller, it can be pronounced controller. I only really hear it pronounced comptroller. And I looked up today why we have this strange spelling, and it's because the French word to count was never taken out of the phrase to count the rolls. And they left it in because if you had a title that was controller in a county government or any other kind of organization, that would sound like the person that is in control. That is not how I feel. So why do we have an independent controller? So let's talk this through. So it's independent oversight of financial operations. The goal of the controller's office is to review the books, to review how we're doing this work. What are the processes by which money moves? How do we? All of the. I'm trying to think of ways to describe it, but all the financial operations of the organization. And what we want to do, like I said, we're not a gotcha organization. We're not out there to just kind of like scold people. We're there to improve the organization. There's this age-old argument in American politics, small government versus big government. I advance an idea that we can actually do more with our current government and our current budget if we were to just run more efficiently and had less waste in the system. So what the Comptroller's Office does is we can highlight areas where our policies and procedures may not be working out, maybe where they're not being followed, maybe where they need to be improved. We are going to make recommendations on best practices and ways that we can deal with things in more efficient ways. This is an essential part of checks and balances. Checks and balances in America are really, they're really being stressed right now in the United States. And so I'm also really want to just kind of use this opportunity to make a case for checks and balances, that when someone can do something unchecked and without observation, things can go very poorly for the people, for the government, generally. I think that having a controller that's elected by the people built into the system makes our government much stronger in Dutchess County. The other thing that our office does that I do is have to be thinking about the bigger picture for like what is the longer term vision for the county's finances? How are things looking? What are the trajectory? And I think what we'll look at later is generally Dutchess County's finances are in decent shape. But when you look under the hood, it's how do you get into decent shape, I think, is another way to look at this. So the Comptroller's Office, what we do is we don't look for, but when we find waste, when we find abuse, when we find mismanagement, our job is to call attention to that, and to hopefully influence policymakers and certainly to inform the public. Informing the public is a very important part of this job. It's something that I take very seriously. Largely because I had to answer that question so much last year about what a comptroller does, but it means that there's something about our county government that people don't understand well, and as the person in that office, I feel it's my duty to kind of change that. So what actually does the Comptroller's Office do? At the highest level, we do claims auditing. We'll talk a little bit about that, but that's paying our bills. We do reporting and recommendations like I described, and then we're also putting out public information. But an important thing here to distinguish is the Comptroller's Office. We have the window that we have the best window on the claims, on the invoices, and the money going out of the county. We're paying our bills. At the finance department is where the money is coming in, and they see things from that side. So we spend less time focusing on the revenue of the county, though we have access to it, and we can see that, and we can look into it. We can do reports on it. One of our next reports will be about sales taxes. But we are much more in tune with the expenditures and the money going out. So who is the Office of the Comptroller? So we have one elected person, myself. We have 3 appointed positions. We have the Deputy Comptroller, Brian Kelly, who's with us here today. Director of Audit and Control, who oversees the team of all of the auditors. Her name's Keely, she's not here tonight. And then the Executive Assistant, Alana Sawchuk, who is... and then we have 6 auditors, among them a senior auditor and a junior auditor. And then we have our senior program assistant and our account clerk, sort of more focused on the claims auditing side of things. So what I was describing for the work, the claims auditing, there's the invoice processing, checking the payments and making sure that there's this one team that's focused on that, and then there's another team that's focused on supporting that team, but also doing the reports and doing the deeper dives into what is going on in the county. And having those in the same office has obvious benefits, right? Like if you're paying the invoices, you're going to see a pattern maybe, that we're being billed at an incorrect rate, or something's going on in some kind of pattern. That is something that might be a trigger for us to now go and look at and do a report on, or just to have a conversation with the team and say, hey, what's going on? We're seeing some issues here. Let's talk it through. So, claims auditing. You guys are here for this. So our office audits all outgoing payments. We approve all purchase orders. We review all contracts. So when we get an invoice, if a team wants to pay, let's say they have a bill for $10,000, you know, we're going to check that against what's in the purchase order. We're going to check that against what's in the contract. We want to make sure that we received things. You know, we want proof of delivery, that we receive goods and services. In government, we don't pay in advance. There's no like front payment. We pay after goods and services are delivered to the people. So we check proof of delivery. We check that we're being billed for the right amount. That we actually have, this work is contracted if it needs to be. So we're making sure that the payments are all being done on the up and up. We also review budget transfers and resolutions. So we're looking at any places where money is moving. When our reporting starts, we're also interested in places where cash might be moving and not necessarily in our systems. But we operate in a municipal finance system called Logos, a company called New World. It's a commonly used system for county governments. The claims auditing team is looking at all types of payments that go out. So, you know, I described a $10,000 bill. If any of you ever heard of the Medicaid share, where counties have to pay a contribution to the overall bill for Medicaid in New York State. So we actually will release a $740,000 check every week. If somebody who belongs to a union has an allowance in their contract that their boots can be replaced when they wear thin, they will submit that, that all comes through our office. And what do? We have to check the union contract to make sure that there is an allowance for boots, that kind of thing. So we do that deep digging. The whole team does that deep digging on every payment. And of course, we review P cards, which is essentially like the emergency credit card that every commissioner has access to. And then we're looking for everything to be in compliance with policy, with the county policy. Audits and reports. So this is the more kind of like the side of the work of the comptroller's office that people are more familiar with the audit reports that we put out. So we do a few different types of reports. So we have informational reports, and that's the work that we have released so far. The two reports that are over there on the table that we'll discuss a little bit tonight are these special reports that we do. One of them is COVID-19 funding, like how we used all of our ARP funds. We're wrapping that up. If I'm involved on a project, we call it a controller's report, and we have one over there, and that's about federal funding. We'll talk about that tonight. But these are informational reports. This is a service to the public, right? To say like this is some information that we think is salient, that's important for you to know. Audit reports follow a science. There's a little more to audit reporting. Auditing is a profession, right? There's a science to how audits are conducted, and usually what you're looking at is you're taking two sets of information and validating, using one to validate the other. And we do that not just with dollars and cents. It's not just about numbers, but it's looking at policies and procedures. Do we have policies and procedures in place for a certain type of activity that we're looking at? Are those policies and procedures adequate? If they are adequate, are they being followed? So a lot of the stuff that you'll see in our audit reports will include findings and recommendations. So we'll document the findings, and then we'll document the recommendations. There is a pattern in Dutchess County government of the Comptroller's Office's recommendations not getting implemented, and that's something that I am very focused on, and is the nature of the conversations that I've been having with the county executive the last few months. So when we do an audit, we can do an audit of anywhere where county funds are being spent. So we look at the finances, we look at the financial operations, all related systems and processes for county departments, so any agency in the county that has county funds, or any entity that is contracted with the county and receiving county funds. So we do these what we call agency reports. We're working on one right now that'll be wrapping up very soon with Cornell Cooperative Extension. One that we did last year was with the SPCA. Well, I wasn't there for that, but the team did. And then, we'll also look at major capital projects. Like I mentioned, we'll look at cash transactions, anywhere where cash is moving, or anywhere where money is moving around outside of systems. If there's a change in leadership, so if we have a new public defender, we would do an audit for the new public defender to say, hey, here's everything that's been going on. Good example, we had a new district attorney, Anthony Parisi, last year. One of the first things that he said to that comptroller was, will you please audit me? So I can know what I need to improve now that I'm taking over this team. Grant programs, mandated periodic reports, some of the periodic reports, they could be particularly interesting to the public, but I can answer questions about those later. We also do a popular annual financial report. So after our financials are, the financial reporting is done for the county, and we do we do an audit of the financials with a company called Drescher and Malecki. I had a meeting with them today. They kind of do the overall finances for the county. We do what's called a popular annual financial report that Alana does a lot of work on, actually, which is trying to make all of that information that we have something that's easy for the public to understand and process. Because, the truth is that sometimes we use quite technical language, but it's also because we have to, not because we're trying to be obscure. It's because it's our job to be as precise as possible in our word choice, right? So, other things the office does, as I mentioned, we recommend and propose revisions to policies and procedures. We can do public surveys. Right now we have a survey available to the public because we're trying to gather information from anybody who has lost federal funding or a federal job or a federal contracted funding or job. Vendor management, so all of the vendors that are in the county system are there because we're there. Their tax documents are processed by our office. Their 1099s, their automatic payment system. We coordinate with the Office of the State Comptroller, with Jasmine and others in the office, obviously on unclaimed funds as well. We process FOIL requests for functions related to our office and financial information in the county. I am, as Comptroller, the chair of the Independent Auditing Committee, which I was learning a little bit more about today. And then we do events like this and other things. So, comptrollers, the last two comptrollers have done events like, helping people understand how to do personal finance stuff, anti-scam things, and we'll be doing some of that stuff this year as well with some of the other elected officials of Dutchess County. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about some of the reports that we've done so far. So I got into the office, I went to 22 Market Street, and I started to settle in, and I'm learning a lot and meeting the team and everything. And then, boom, there's a new president, and a week later there's a memo from that White House, an OMB memo, that says that all federal disbursements are going to be cut off. Phone starts ringing off the hook. I'm starting to wonder what's going on. People are immediately asking me, oh my God, what's going on? What does this mean? We're trying to figure out what it means. We're talking to professional associations, watching podcasts, trying to figure out what exactly is going on here. The OMB memo gets retracted. There's a bunch of executive orders. Let's just say that federal disbursements don't feel as secure as they have in previous years. We're constantly keeping an eye on it now. It's kind of a bit of a detour from the main function of the office, but it is really essential to what we do because going back to that idea that I need to be thinking about the long-term fiscal health of the county. If we're talking about an economic downturn, we're talking about a downturn in revenue, we're talking about a downturn in services, we got to keep an eye on the longer-term picture. So we just kind of felt from the beginning, because we were getting so many questions about, is the county okay? How much funding does the county get from the federal government? What is it used for? What are we going to lose? There was just a lot of anxiety, and we really felt compelled to answer that question. And frankly, it was going to save our office a little bit of work by not having to answer the phone so much. So what we did was we did a report on where all of our federal funding goes, and I'll try to go through this very quickly. We bring in federal grants in different ways. Some of it passes through New York State, some of it comes directly from the federal government. When it comes in, it doesn't really tell you much because you can receive a grant one year and you could use that grant you can spend that grant down for multiple years. For example, our American Rescue Plan, when we got that $57 million up front, we could then spend it down. But then there's other grants where it's a reimbursable grant. You commit to that activity, you do that activity, you have your bills, and then you get reimbursed by the federal government. So looking at where the money is coming in wasn't going to paint as accurate of a picture as we wanted to. So what we looked at is what's called our schedule of expenditures of federal awards, which is a part of our audited financials, and that shows all of the money basically going out the door. That is, all of the things that we're purchasing with federal dollars. And that gives you a smoother kind of picture of how our funds are used over time. And the most recent period, the most recent year for which we have audited financials is 2023. So we looked at the last 3 years that we had, and what we found was in that period, on average, we had about 10% of our expenditures were funded with federal dollars. That's not something that has predictive value. I'm not going to say that this year it's going to be the same, but it was just an interesting piece of information, and it helped me answer a question that people had. How much federal money did we use in that year? $65 million. Of that 10%, of the $65 million that we used in 2023, 2/3% of that was for health and human services. So this is like really critical stuff. And if you look at the report in the appendix, you can see a list of all of the programs that were funded or that were spent that year. And you'll see that it's a lot of human services. Of the top 5 programs, it includes TANF. TANF is for families in need. That is what replaced what used to be called welfare. It's for helping families through hard times. Public transit dollars, so we get a lot of public transit money for purchasing buses, improving bus stations. HEAP, which is home energy assistance. The medical assistance program, which helps support costs related to Medicaid and Medicare, and then adoption assistance. So these are the 5 biggest programs. In that report, to also kind of get a handle on what the impact of changes in federal allocations were going to be, we took a look at our entitlements in Dutchess County, and what we found was that entitlement dollars coming into individuals or hospitals, whatever, Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, and others, amounts to $3.25 billion. So, what we just kind of processed there is that we're talking about $65 million of direct injection into Dutchess County government, estimated, right? And then another $3.25 billion into Dutchess County. We're not even talking about schools, we're not talking about municipalities, we're not talking about businesses, nonprofits, museums, libraries, farms, or anybody else that's been calling us. This is just entitlement program. So a reduction in any of this, you can imagine, is going to have an overall ripple effect through our local economy. We also have a report that just came out on our COVID-19 relief dollars. So we received $57 million from the U.S. Treasury in 2021 and 2022. And there was a plan called Dutchess Invests, which was created by County Executive Mark Molinaro. And of course, he would later depart as county executive. And so we have William O'Neill and then Sue Serino. So we've had 3 county executives and over 4 years of this planning. So the plans, naturally you would expect that they would change when there's new leadership, is not unexpected. But we found that of the original plan, only 54% of the original plan was actually executed. And in the first, second, and third versions of the plans, we saw things that just, you can see things that are on the list that just didn't really fit. Things that we knew would be expended after 2024, because you have to use all of this money essentially by December 2024. So our housing trust fund was in there, so that doesn't really quite make sense. And then there were some other projects that just didn't really fully blossom. There was a couple of projects, real estate projects, where land was purchased, plans were looked into, didn't really work out, so the rest of the money wasn't needed. What to do with it? So the money did a lot of good, and I'm never going to detract from that. I mean, we're talking about keeping our nonprofits that we depend on alive, youth programming, keeping kids out of trouble, emergency communications, workforce investment. These are like investments in Dutchess County. Right? These are real good things. But it was also used for improving Dutchess County, the Heritage Financial Stadium, primarily things like turfing the field, lights for the field, batting cages, and then also some real estate development projects. Upcoming reports that we have. I think our next report is probably going to be the sales tax update. So we do an annual sales tax update that was started under Comptroller Robin Lois. This year we are releasing our sales tax update a little later because we want to include some more information that's not actually going to be available until next week. So what we're going to look at is how much sales tax was projected, how much was budgeted for, how much came in, and how much and how did that bear out against what was needed. So we're also, the information that we're waiting on is industry information. We can get from New York State what industries we collect the most sales tax from. And I think at a time where people are really worried and feeling a lot of anxiety, I felt that was a worthwhile thing to add into the report and wait an extra month for that, and that's what we're doing. But the quick and dirty on the sales tax update is that there was a proposal to increase our sales taxes in 2023, and the 2024 budget was dependent on that higher sales tax rate. Dutchess County counties just can't change their sales tax rate. We have to go to Albany and get what's called a home rule vote, which is usually approved, and it's assumed that counties know what's best for themselves. But it was an election year, and I guess no elected officials wanted to carry a sales tax increase during an election year, so we didn't have that sales tax increase. The good news is that, rightly so, our budget director forecasts sales taxes conservatively. So our sales tax receipts were $3 million more than were expected at this lower rate, but obviously weren't enough to cover the amount, the full amount with that higher tax rate that was never approved. And we'll get into all of that in this report. I mentioned before we have an agency audit coming out, Cornell Cooperative Extension and Beacon. We know Cornell Cooperative Extension as those people that help us with electrification and figuring out how to insulate our homes. In most of Dutchess County, they're known for their 4-H programming and creating the next generation of local farmers, which is very critical to the 1,700 farms we have in Dutchess County. We have a report coming out about the jail commissary. We have a report coming out about our debt servicing, and we will have the final report on the jail project, which was, for those of you who recall, this was the largest capital project in the history of Dutchess County, and improvements to a new jail, a new sheriff's office, and a few other buildings. Things that are on our radar, again, keeping an eye on our federal funding survey. We are getting responses. We're hearing mostly right now from museums and libraries who are worried about their IMLS funding. Yvette and I are both trying to get in touch with a few people to kind of make sense of things. But there's a lot of anxiety out there in our museum and library community right now. Nonprofit organizations, farms, we're hearing from a lot of folks about different types of pauses in funding, cost of funding. We're always looking at the economic outlook and sales tax receipts, so we monitor sales taxes every time we get a disbursement from New York State. So we're just keeping an eye on that and looking at that at the comparison of the years and making sure there's no huge fluctuations. Right now, things look flat. Our March sales tax receipts, I think, were 1% lower than 2024. In the same period, 2024, really nothing to think much of that. That could be a change in the weather. 1% is not a lot, but if we were to see a 10% change, then that's something that we're going to have. And then the other thing that we're always talking about is transparency and accessibility. So I campaigned on this last year, and what I really believe is important is that the work of our office is actually really vital to the people of Dutchess County. And I kind of hold this view that nobody should be responsible for going out and getting that information. And so what we do in our office now is we try to put that information in people's laps. So, we're gonna release a report that's gonna be like a 12, 15, 20, sometimes much longer PDF. Not everybody's gonna wanna, open that up and read that. But they might sit through a 90-second or 2-minute video that's kind of summarizing things, and then we can give them access to dig a little deeper if they want. So that's the transparency part. On the Comptroller's website at dutchessny.gov, if you go to County Comptroller, you can find a thing called the Taxpayer's Checkbook. This is something that's been going on for several years that we're continuing, and that is every month it gets loaded onto the website. Alana adds it to the website. Here are all of the vendors that we paid. Here's the number of invoices and how much we paid, and then we're going to continue that. We're having conversations now about ways that we can improve this. We're looking at data visualization. We're talking to a company. We're looking at some internal tools available to us. This kind of stuff takes a long time, but I really want to take this far, and we'll do our best with it. On the accessibility side of things, you know, I was talking about how our reports need to use precise language, and to not use that precise language can kind of undercut the statements that you're making and the information that you're sharing. So what we did is we started adding a glossary of terms to our audit reports. So maybe you don't know what an encumbrance is, or maybe you don't know specifically what the definition of an expenditure might be. You can jump to the glossary of terms and learn about that. The 2025 adopted budget. So I'm not going to get into the budget too much, and I hope that's not what you're here for, but the budget is created and owned by the county executive and the county legislature. They're the policy makers in the county. I am the oversight. So their job is to allocate funding, to figure out, you know, what they want to spend the money on. But a quick summary here is the budget that we're operating under this year is $630 million. Last year it was $601 million. Of the taxes, which only represent 2/3 of our revenue. 102 million is in property taxes, and that has been steadily going down. The property tax rate per 1,000 square feet has been decreasing, and our sales taxes, which are 3 times the amount of property taxes, those have been steadily increasing over time. Not drastically, and we're not too far off in line with other counties who have similar size budgets and populations. But I think there's an important thing to think about here when we're looking at economic uncertainty, and that is property taxes are quite fixed, right? There's not going to be a lot of variability in your property taxes. You can kind of bank on that, right? But your sales taxes are out of your control. So if we have any kind of economic downturn, people right now are talking about how they're putting off buying a car or putting off buying a new appliance because they don't know what's going to happen with the economy. That will change how much revenue we have, right? When people change their purchasing behavior, sales taxes, revenue will change, and we will have less revenue in the county. And that is the end of the presentation. So if you want to... presentation, so I appreciate getting a clap for that. If you have other questions for us, if you want to follow up on anything, if you ever want to, you know, maybe you're aware of something. You know, we take tips from the public, we take tips from anybody, we follow up on them. You know, our job is the oversight, and you know, any questions you have, whatever it may be, please email us, and we'll get back to you very soon. If you have questions about the budget itself, if you have questions about how, you know, why our revenue profile looks the way that it does, how funds are used, what kind of programs they're funding. Those would be questions that you want to ask the county executive and the county legislature. Yvette, great.
No, I'm totally happy to answer any questions too. We're here, we're not going anywhere.
So, I really want people to get a message today that your county government is really important. And does a lot. And it's a lot of stuff that we often, in our minds, associate, people who don't know government, associate with New York State. But it's really done at the county level. And I really want people to think about, you know, like what is in the county budget and what more we can do, what less we could do. And I invite you to get involved in that process. It's obviously something that's very important to me and Brian and Alana and the team in the Comptroller's office. But it's something that I think everybody should be paying attention to, and I think everybody has obviously a stake in and should be paying attention to. So with that, I'll leave this up here so you can write that information down. But the rest of this time we have together, which is what? How much time do we have?
6:45.
Well, we've got 15 minutes, really?
No, we have 40.
Oh, yeah, we're till 7:30, right? So good. So that's perfect, right? So we have 45 minutes for questions. So this is the town hall part, not the Dan talks about stuff.
Dan, do you meet often with the county executive? Is that a part of like something scheduled monthly or?
On an as-needed basis, yeah. You mean my meeting with the county executive?
Do you?
I do, yeah.
Okay,
Yeah.
how often is it?
We don't have it on a schedule. It's kind of on an as-needed basis. Yeah.
I'm just wondering if it's not Sue Serino, but adversarial, typical.
No, Sue Serino and I have a good relationship. When we got to know each other in January, what I said to Sue, and it was, most of the stuff that's on our audit docket, most of the stuff that we'll be looking into precedes her. So it's an opportunity for her as a new county executive to, like I was talking about change of leadership, this is an opportunity for her to, find out ways that we can do things better, and for her and I to update those policies and procedures together. So, I think, again, like this is a nonpartisan job, and the way that I have to approach it is that we're making recommendations to make government better. Whether you're a Republican or Democrat, I'm going to bring that to you, and I won't leave it alone either, like when we put out recommendations, we'll probably start doing something where on an annual basis we summarize those recommendations and score for the public whether or not they were implemented.
You were saying typically they weren't, didn't you say that?
They were not being.
Typically not, no. If you look at the audit reports, you can see the findings of the reports, you can see the recommendations, and then at the end there's usually a letter of whoever's being audited gets an opportunity to respond to the audit. And some of the stuff that we've seen from previous executives was that these recommendations, for example, might impede on their latitude to operate.
Thanks.
You mentioned the Public Audit Committee, and I was wondering what that is. I mean, we're down here in Beacon, and I was just in a conversation about certain county committees that the citizenry might be recommended for, and I don't know whether the ledge votes on it or what that is, but is that one of those committees that you're chairing?
This is not, no.
Okay.
This would be like the head of finance, the budget director, representatives from the legislature, and what we do is we meet with Drescher and Malecki, the company that we contract with to audit our financials. We sit with them for the entrance meeting and go over the plan of attack and what information they need, and then at the end of the process, we would meet with them for the exit conversation, which is like, here are the findings.
So I want to follow up on the question about the recommendations and what would be an example of a recommendation, and what's the effect of it that not taking the recommendation in terms of like our tax dollars, and what enforcement mechanisms are there other than just publishing an audit to expose that these things aren't being done that are,
Well, I think we have a good example in Dutchess County that comes up a lot and actually illustrates the point of what happens when you don't implement those recommendations. In 2021, there was a report from Comptroller Robin Lois about the renovations being done to the Public Defender's Building, and there was a number of recommendations about basically assessing property for usability and for cost efficiency. And those recommendations were not updated in the policies and procedures for capital assets. In fact, that policies and procedures hasn't been updated since 2018. Since that 2021 report, there have been some other real estate issues that have come up in which Dutchess County purchased land that wasn't up to speed, or it was going to require a lot of money in order for it to be usable. So like the property was purchased before the due diligence was done. And had some of these policies and procedures been in place at that time, it wouldn't have fallen into that pothole again. And I began, actually, my first meeting with Sue Serino, I brought her that example. Because she was trying to kind of understand, like, why does this matter? And I said, well, if you follow if we have new policies and procedures that are a little stricter for us, we're going to stay out of trouble. Well, we didn't do it, and then we got into trouble a couple more times. So I hope that answers.
oh, there's just the enforcement part.
What's that?
Just the enforcement part of the question. Is there any way to enforce these recommendations?
No, the lessons learned are supposed to be the enforcement. No, I would like to. I mean, it's something that we've talked about in the office, like what more we can do to ensure that the recommendations are taken. Right now, the way that I'm approaching the matter is like to stay like as clear-headed and nonpartisan and focus on like this is about good government, this is not about Republicans, Democrats. Stay in that and just keep sharing those recommendations over and over again. And we'll make them public, and we'll just keep sharing them with the public and keep sharing them with the county executive.
First, thank you for explaining where the word comptroller comes from. The other thing I'm not clear on, with the American Recovery Act, did you say that we did not spend all that money?
We did spend it all. I'm sorry, I didn't mention that actually.
Okay.
So it was $57 million and it was spent in its entirety. What I said, what I had on the slide there, and it was all done appropriately as well. It was all by the book. I had questions about whether sometimes things are by the book, but they're not great ideas. So there's an area where I'm operating, but there's of the original plan, 54% of it was implemented according to that original plan. But there were these other projects, we purchased a property in the city of Poughkeepsie and did some work. There was a YMCA on the property. The YMCA was torn down. So the demolition bill is on ARP. We used our COVID-19 for the demolition. We used the COVID-19 money for the plans from an architecture firm that gave us a proposal for a property that was $170 million. We don't have $170 million. The project was scaled back to $105 million. Remember, the county budget is $630. So it was a $105 million plan, and then there was no plan at all. And so the money that was remaining in that line was no longer going to be used by our COVID-19 money because it was wildly,
The YMCA, can you give us an update on that situation? The YMCA?
That is the update.
That's it?
The YMCA was demolished. There's a big hole in downtown Poughkeepsie now. We have plans for a kind of like a children's center called the Youth Opportunity Union, the U. But I don't know that that's going to go anywhere. We're not sure really what's going to happen with that
So
now.
it's about dormant right now? Nothing's happening?
In the 2025 adopted budget, there is no plan for that property as far as we can tell. The county executive started a program that's kind of like loosely tied to that facility that didn't happen, and those are grants for like youth enrichment and youth activities. So there's kind of like this micro grant program, but it's not related to a facility. We did have an RFI out in December and January for someone to operate the facility, but we were just looking at that today and we can't really quite make sense of it. But at this time, there's no documented or public plan for what to do with what we've been calling the pit, the $4.8 million pit.
Right.
Yeah, can you talk a little bit about, sounds like there's been multiple different comptrollers recently, sort of when you think of the office, the professionals who have been there for a while, how you as the leader of that office kind of make sure that they feel respected and inspired to actually continue to do the work through all the changes that have happened?
So just to kind of back up, we had Comptroller Robin Lois, who was elected in 2017 and 2021, and Robin took a position in 2023 to work with Tom Napoli. So she's actually up in Albany working with the state comptroller, and deservedly so. Robin was amazing. Robin is working now with municipalities and school districts for all of New York State. And fortunately, I get to have calls with her occasionally, which is really cool. When Robin stepped down, then County Executive Bill O'Neill appointed former chair of the legislature, Greg Pulver, to be comptroller. I won the election last fall for the last year of Robin's term. So in Robin's second term, there was 2 years of Robin, 1 year of Greg, 1 year of Dan. Has everybody got that? And now this year there's an election for a full 4-year term that has nothing to do with Robin Lewis. So in that time, this amazing team, who I have absolutely come to love and count as my family, they had 3 bosses. When I went in and I introduced myself to everybody, I met the senior auditor, and I was kind of just casually talking, like, oh, how long you been here and whatnot, and she says, oh, I've been here for 31 years. I said, oh, us comptrollers just come and go, don't they? But they're used to that, right? Like when you work in government, you get used to your leaders changing. I've had many years in government where you're in and you're out, and the principal that you're attached to is in, and then they're out of, you know, this just happens in politics. And I think they take it all in stride. And let's be honest with you, like, auditors are professionals, right? Like they have a way of doing things, they have a way of looking at things. And I could have come into that office and I could have said, all right, we're going to clear the audit docket and we're going to work on projects X, Y, and Z. Well, what we did was I worked with the auditors and I said, all right, what are we going to prioritize? Let's go through all of this, let's understand it. And we just changed the priority of what we were working on, but not really by much, because I wanted to honor the work that they do. I also just want to say that, you know, I had an opportunity to meet with everybody on the team one-on-one in January, and it's just a team full of really amazing, committed public servants. They're amazing folks. It's a very collaborative office. The auditors are in these rooms, you know, where they can shut the door and tune out the world and have a phone call with whoever they're talking. And, you know, they're in each other's offices all the time, collaborating and supporting each other and helping out. And it's just a really cool thing to see. To walk into an environment as a professional and not, you know, and knowing that you're going to be leading a team, you don't know what it's going to be like when you get there, and then to find a team like that is a blessing. She is not part of it.
You talk about the scare of the possibility of losing federal funding. Has there been a plan to significantly support programs that have the opportunity to use funding to not allow the taxpayers to feel the impact of it?
Okay, well, so what I'll do, I'll talk a little bit about the different ways of that losing funding, what that can mean, and what we can do to alleviate that. So we receive direct federal funding for the program, some of the programs we described, and many others, dozens and dozens of them. Losing any funding for any one of those federal programs would simply end that program in most cases, right? So, you know, if we had $300,000 to study whether we can electrify the bus fleet, if we lose that $300,000, we just don't do that study, right? Another way is SNAP, which comes in, you know, food stamps, we used to call them, and HEAP, home energy assistance. If those get cut, and those are two programs that Washington is talking about cutting, it really depends on how that cut is done at the federal level. Does that mean fewer people are receiving that benefit, or are the same number of people receiving fewer benefits? We don't know what the impact will be. So recent things that we've seen, you know, I'm obviously concerned about the sales tax revenue going down if we have an economic shrinkage, and there's a lot of indicators right now that are starting to signal that we could be going into an economic downturn. We're looking at things like consumer confidence, inventories, producer output, producer confidence, these kinds of early indicators of how behaviors are beginning to change in the economy. And, you know, we look at things like the gross regional product, the gross county product, and how that is going to be changing. We also are looking at, that's the sales tax piece and the general economic downturn part. So we had we have what's called a fund balance in our government budget. It's about 2 or 3 months of government spending, right? So we call that our fund balance. Having a good, healthy fund balance is a good indicator of how healthy our government finances are. We're in good shape in that regard. But how far will that get you if you have multiple things going on at the same time? So let's say that the federal government cuts Medicaid, even by a small amount. They're talking about $880 billion. I couldn't tell you what New York's contribution to that is, New York's part of that is. But in New York State, we have a unique situation where New York State doesn't feel that they have enough money to cover their entire, somewhat generous Medicaid program in New York State. So that is a unique situation of all the 50 states where those costs are shared with the counties. So when I was talking about that Medicaid cost sharing, we are literally signing off on $43 million of checks a year, and we have no control over how that money is spent, and we have no influence over whether that number goes up or down. We're on the hook for that. If the federal government cuts Medicaid more, New York State will no doubt try to cover some of that gap, but they're probably going to pass some of that additional cost onto the counties. So if you are in a situation where you have lower sales tax revenue, higher Medicaid costs. Potentially, you're trying to cover other kinds of federal shortfalls. One example being Hudson River Housing almost lost funding for, their funding was paused for 115 homeless families. They were about to put some people out on the street this year, and the county executive said they would try to cover that cost. You wouldn't be able to do all of those things with our fund balance. So then you start borrowing, or you start cutting services, or you start raising taxes. So, to the question about whether there's planning, I've been given assurances that there's planning. I have not seen any plans. I've asked for plans. I met with the county executive yesterday and emphasized the importance of planning. We have a fund balance that can get us through a storm. I don't think it can get us through a hurricane season. So those are the email.
The Dutchess County Legislature, we have asked for plans for exactly what you're talking about, what we're talking about here. We've asked for them for the last 2 months. Behind closed doors in leadership meetings, on the floor of the legislature, and in email. So there's records, there's lots of records for us asking for this. So it's not just you, it's us too, but we are up against, there is still a Republican majority that we have to deal with.
Yeah, I'll bring it back a little bit away from the politics for a bit and kind of focus it on like financial practice. Like, yeah, we don't know what's going to happen. We know that we call it uncertainty because we don't know what's going to happen. But we can predict a lot of different scenarios, and it wouldn't be that challenging to do that. And so, what does it look like if we have to help HRH? What if, and we have to deal with a sales tax shortfall, and we have these other things? We can model that, right? We know what those costs are, and we can figure out where we would, what we would do in those situations. I'm not saying that that's not happening. I'm just saying that we haven't seen.
You mentioned that you get tips for things to look into. What's an example of a tip, and what has a tip saved us as taxpayers?
That's a good question. I've only been in the office for 4 months, so I have not encountered a tip that saved us taxpayer dollars. I won't put Alana and Brian on the spot, but if they do have any illustrative examples, they're welcome to share them. I can tell you a tip that we got recently. Is we have a program in Dutchess County called Bus Patrol LLC. It's a company that puts basically this radar system on the sides of school buses. So when the stop sign pops out and the lights come on, it starts monitoring traffic and making sure that cars aren't passing while the stop sign is there. This program is a little lecherous. Nobody wants to say, we don't want to be watching kids and making sure that they're safe. But if there's very few instances in the country annually where children are being hit in this kind of situation, and we have this way, overburdensome ticketing system that just picks up everybody for $250 tickets, even on a 6-lane, like on Route 9, if you're not stopping on the other side of the meridian, and because there's a bus on this side, all those people passing on Route 9 get a bill for $250. And, well, those $250 does not go to the county. It's picked up by this company called Bus Patrol, who gets, I think, 60%, and then of the 40%, they get a fraction of that. The county gets the vendor gets a fraction of that. And it doesn't actually change behavior. So if you have a bus, it's basically just it turns school buses into driving cash registers. Every time the bus stops, 10 cars go by, this company makes $2,500, right? So what is the right way to do this? And that's a tip that came into our office. Multiple people have been complaining about it. There's some strange stuff with regards to what information is being disclosed on the tickets. There's ways of not paying that ticket, and those ways are not being shared on the ticket itself. So, this might be a thing where we got a tip and we'll look into it and try to do something about it. I don't know that it's going to be a thing that I can say is going to cost the county money or save the county money, but it doesn't seem like a good financial practice. So, what can we do?
How much have you had the opportunity / are you interested in seeing what best practices other counties are doing with their, I know that there are only 8, I guess, that have an elected comptroller. They might still have offices, just things that they're doing that you're like, oh, that might be a good idea for Dutchess as well.
Yeah, I mean, I have a very good relationship with Ulster County Comptroller March Gallagher. And she's been really helpful in kind of helping understand like ways of, it's a different position, the comptroller's office, than a policy-making position, and sometimes it's not clear on what your, as an individual, like professional, what your place is. And so she kind of helped me with a little bit of that. But as far as like sharing of best practices, I mean, that's really all we do. So like, you know, when like we're talking about a report, we're looking at the Government Finance Officers Association is probably going to have some recommendations on this topic. Let's see what those are. And like that's what we do as best practices, basically, as an office, is we share them. You know, we say, well, the reason we ran into the problem X, Y, and Z is because we weren't following this best practice. Here's that best practice. But there's a number of associations that we interact with from the General Services Administration, the federal government, GFOA, New York State Association of Counties. There's all sorts of groups that we interact with that, you know, that have these kinds of things for us to lean into.
I guess I'll bring it back to buses. I'll bring it back to buses and federal cuts and the transit federal cuts. And just wondering if you had, and if you have any insight on how that might look at the county level, or if you're finding any ways to make the transportation more efficient or better or improved.
Yeah, I mean, we discussed earlier this year public transit as an audit in and of itself, and did not take it up. It is not because it's not an important issue, but it was not a timely one relative to some of the other stuff that we were looking at. And when I say timely, I mean things that we could learn from and implement before we make the same mistake again. The public transit picture is an interesting one, and I don't want to talk too much about policy and go out of my kind of lane, but I would say I think the electrification study is an important one because I think that helps us untangle a lot of the feedback that the county gets about the bus system, namely, like, you know, why do we have buses of this size? Why are they diesel? What can we do instead? I think another component is maintenance. What's the bus? Is it bus 408?
Bus 408.
Bus 408. So bus 408, we pay all the bills, right? So we see the invoices. So when you know, when Public Works sends a bill for maintenance on bus 408, we get like a triangle of it every time bus 408 breaks down. But I think the maintenance costs are unexpected. I think the maintenance costs are a little high. And I'd like to see some fleet replacement, but that's not my area.
That electrification study that you mentioned, is that theoretically cut? Is that actually cut? Is that a real, is that in the works?
The best that I understand this was the only grant, or this was the only federal award that was withheld in February after all of this information came through. And what happened was, a letter went to the vendor, the company that was working on this study, telling them that they had lost the federal award and to cease, to cease the work, the continuation of the work. A couple weeks later, after I learned of that, I tried to track down the memo or the letter from the federal government saying that it had been withdrawn or paused, and it didn't exist. And it turned out that the county had actually paused it. Because there were components that were in the executive orders, so it was kind of like a precautionary stoppage, but because it never was actually paused, the program resumed. So they're fully funded and the study is continuing.
I just want to try to get something straight in my head. Let's say you see something that's wasteful in the budget or wherever. Do you have to contact the legislature to ask them to have that cut? Is that the way it works? Or you have the ability to cut it yourself?
I don't have the ability to cut it. I have the ability to tell people to cut it.
Okay.
What I do have the ability is to go to the public and show the waste. So if you haven't followed us yet, you can follow us on social media as Comptroller Dan. There's a QR code over here you can scan. We're going to do a video series about waste that we're discovering.
Good.
And you would find it there.
Good.
You have the responsibility for approving purchase orders. Is that a mechanism for saying, I think this spending is wasteful?
Again, the Comptroller's Office does not have a veto on how we're spending money and who we're spending money with. Like, we don't look at an invoice and say, oh, okay, we've got this environmental study, but we hired a fossil fuel company to do the study. That doesn't seem right. That's not purview of our office. Our office is, was this authorized by the legislature? Is this the rate that the fossil fuel company quoted us in such and such? So we look at the mechanics of the purchases. We don't make judgment calls, and we certainly don't have a veto over purchasing. That's more like the kind of thing that has been happening in Washington, actually, is when you hear about Doge getting access to systems, that's like the stuff that makes our hearts race, because we know our county equivalent of that, and the idea for that to get in the hands of politics and not financial professionals is terrifying.
If I could add to that, though,
Yeah.
what the approval process gives us is the opportunity to raise questions. And if not outright deny something, we can engage either the executive or department head in whether they are following a best practice or whether there are problematic elements to a given purchase. And sometimes in the course of doing that, they will say, oh, path of least resistance, let me do something differently. And so we have had instances where, to circumvent those questions, they might do something as a lease instead of a purchase, for better or worse. So it's a bit of a dance sometimes.
I remember Scott Stringer, the New York City Comptroller. He worked for the city.
I know him well.
And I know there's a
bane of
lot of
existence.
power in city, spending.
Yeah.
And so that's was the genesis of my question.
Okay, got it. Okay.
Yeah. Right.
It actually reminded me of something that's come up in our office in the last couple of months, or last year, that I think I might have passed over, and that is contract. So when we are processing a claim, like when we're approving a claim, we're looking at the contract to see, like, okay, well, we're getting billed for this thing that's $200,000. Do we have a contract that says that thing is $200,000, right? And we have the system that we use interprets our contract documents into what's called a contract module. And when we have questions about the contract on the back end at the time that we're paying bills, it causes a lot of anxiety because you have a vendor who completed their work and is now waiting to get paid, and they're stressed out. And our nonprofit partners particularly, sometimes we actually have issues where, quite often actually, we have issues where a contract is not even registered by the time that the work has been done and they're starting to bill, and we don't even have a contract. So our contracting process is going to have to tighten up. But what has changed recently was that Dutchess County was audited by the state comptroller because of a change of leadership. So there's an audit that happened, and it was mostly about contracts and proof of delivery. I won't get into the details of it, but there was one of the responses from Dutchess County was that the comptroller's office would have sign off on these contract modules when the contract is actually created, which is going to be much better for our vendors, particularly our nonprofit partners on the back end. But what that also does is it gives us an opportunity to give feedback on the contracts early on in the process, and hopefully, if we have a contract that's written so poorly that we can't even put it into the module, like we don't know how much it's for, or we don't know what it's for, or any of the other terms, key stuff we would expect in a purchasing contract, we can say, no, this contract won't work. So that's a good change, and that's what we're implementing right now.
Is there an area of spending or like a part of the county government that is more opaque than others or like harder to understand? not because of like politics or cooperation, just because of like the nature of the work that was spent.
I guess.
Wow, yeah. I mean, there's a lot of things that are, I mean, some of the reports that we do, like our office will put out what's called the ICAP report, and what that is it's this really elaborate review of spending data that shows us what our new indirect rate would be, and our indirect rate is like, well, you might know what that is if you work in the nonprofit space, but an indirect rate is like if you get money to implement a certain program, you're obviously going to have administrative overhead for that, and you would calculate your indirect. You would calculate your indirect for that. And there's different ways. I think I'm learning. I didn't know this before. There's different types of indirect, and I'm learning a little bit about it right now. That's okay. It's okay. I mean, it's tough work, and it doesn't make a whole lot of sense to outsiders, and it doesn't really have to. But it's a lot of work to make sure that you have a good indirect calculation so that all of your administrative costs are being covered. So, If you guys don't have any questions, that means everybody has time to go and check to see if they have unclaimed funds. I bored a lot of people talking about this stuff last year, and I appreciate anybody who's coming out and interested in it. And thank you all for being here.
I just want to say thank you for you make being a comptroller not boring, so much so that there's a possible future comptroller. It's really cool. So thank you for doing that. And I think showing that the comptroller can be a cool job, but also a transparent job and an honest job, and a place where we can really get information is really important. So I just want to thank you for that.
Thanks.
We love you, Dave.